If I were in an elevator and someone asked me why I go to church, I could say, well, I work there, and get off 8 seconds later at the very next floor. But if our ride were a little longer, I might respond, because for me, church is important. And they would ask why. And then I might have to think for a few floors. Because it helps me feel closer to God, I might say. And then they might say, if they were spiritually inclined at all, well, I feel closer to God on a mountaintop or on a beach or doing yoga or planting flowers in my garden. And then I might have to think for a few more floors, because the truth is I might feel closer to God there too, or at least just as close. So it must be about more than what it makes me feel. So why church? I mean, it's a pretty important question to answer, a pretty important question for churchgoers in particular to answer, because increasingly and for their own reasons, people are deciding that the church is like a factory that makes buggy whips. Fine if you really want to invest in it, but not terribly relevant to today's world. They aren't hostile toward the church. They're disinterested. Why does church even matter? Fortunately, this is a tall hypothetical building, so it's a long hypothetical elevator ride. I might try again, and I might say this. When I was in elementary school, in the school cafeteria, there was a poster on the wall right behind the serving line that said, "You are what you eat." And as an elementary school student, I was a bit more literal in my thinking, so I thought, you are what you eat? How am I a salad or a double bacon barbecue cheeseburger, and what does that even mean? You are what you eat. But now I understand better what it means. It means what you take in is not unimportant. It means you should be conscious or intentional about what you take in, because what you take in has a bearing on how you feel, on how you react, on how healthy you are, and on what you become. And a salad or a double bacon barbecue cheeseburger will both address my hunger or fill my emptiness for a time, but they nourish me differently. What impact does each have upon my heart and on my mind? Do I think more clearly? Am I more awake and alert in my afternoon class or meeting after consuming the salad or the gut bomb with a side of fries? And which one is going to take up permanent residence in my carotid arteries? So continuing the thought, if what I take in has an impact on how I'm thinking or what I'm becoming, then is that true of things other than food? And that begs the question, what do I take in? What am I immersed in and day out and week in and week out? Am I dealing with frustrating office relationships or irritating coworkers who keep me on a slow simmer all the time? Now, the works of the flesh are enmities, quarrels, dissension. What am I taking in to counteract that? Something that reminds me or calls me to respond with my best self, with openness, and with humility, and with compassion. Am I consuming reality TV shows and taking my relationship cues from binge-watching Love Island or The Bachelor? This is how it's normal for people to treat each other? This is how it's okay to act? Now, the works of the flesh are jealousy, licentiousness, carousing, backstabbing. I added that one. Or do I need something that reminds me what love really looks like and how it is lived out in meaningful, hopeful, respectful, generous, world-healing ways day to day? Am I taking in more than my fill of hyper-partisan politics and anxiety-inducing cable news? Doesn't matter the brand. Am I marinating in the meanness, fury, and frustration that partisan punditry and Machiavellian maneuvering seem to stir up? Now, the works of the flesh are enmities, strife, anger, factions, Paul writes. What counters that in my life? What speaks to me messages that faith and hope and love abide? Am I hooked on social media and getting my view of reality from tweets and TikTok videos and highly curated images of other people's lives? Am I surrounding myself with virtual relationships and artificial reality? Or is there an unplugged alternative to that? Real relationships with real people, a place where I can say aloud, I just got a diagnosis and I'm scared to death. And a whole room full of people will drop everything else and pray for me. Or if I'm not the one with the diagnosis, I can drop everything and I can pray for them. Where else in life do you find that? I ask my hypothetical elevator rider as we pass the 87th floor. Where else other than church do you go in this world to encounter some sense of the holy, to share deeply in the lives of other people, to dedicate intentional time to hearing messages like, you are loved and forgiven. You are called to love and to forgive. And yes, you can get messages like that from TED Talks and podcasts, but I've never had a podcast show up with a casserole when I caught COVID. The fruit of the Spirit, Paul writes, is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Am I getting enough servings of fruit in my life? Am I taking in enough love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control? Am I growing in my capacity to exhibit love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and generosity and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control? Are my children surrounded consistently by a community that lifts up as its hallmarks love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and generosity and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control? Perhaps the world needs a community like that more than ever right now. Perhaps there is something far more relevant than a buggy whip factory. Something that urges me a little more and a little better on most weeks to love the Lord my God with all my heart and soul and mind and strength, and my neighbor as myself. The hypothetical elevator is now nearing the top of the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building at 2,723 feet and 163 floors. And I say to my hypothetical elevator companion, may I tell you about my church? During COVID, my church raised $20,000 each, a total of $40,000 to send to struggling mission partners in Palestine and Honduras. Just look around a minute. This group of people, this small room full of people, made that difference in the world. My church annually sends young people to work on mission teams in Richmond and Petersburg. My church proudly saw 2 of its recent college graduates spend a year working with the Presbyterian Church's Young Adult Volunteer Program, a full year of their lives combating poverty and hunger and homelessness and domestic violence. My church has a community garden and an annual crop table that raises thousands of dollars each summer to combat hunger. My church has sponsored a national online conference seeking to end gun violence and marched in parades in the rain to press for reasonable gun legislation, not to curb gun ownership, but to oppose gun idolatry. And across just over 6 years, I have seen my congregation, my sisters and brothers, cry together and hold each other through thick and thin, and send thousands of cards expressing comfort and encouragement and care, and act as a body during the pandemic, setting aside personal opinion or personal comfort around masking to lift up the needs of the vulnerable. My church is sending 29 travelers to Honduras this summer, 29, to dig latrines and pour concrete floors and share eyeglasses and teach children how to brush their teeth, but more than that, to form intentional bonds of fellowship and to pray together across the boundaries of language and culture. My church community breaks bread and sings hymns and offers prayers and cherishes children. And may I tell you something else? You'd be welcome there, known there, loved there, needed there. It's a community that seeks imperfectly but always to bear the fruit that the world needs most. And that is what makes it relevant and important to me beyond words. Why is church important to you? Amen.